August 10th, 1995, as I sit here once more in a walk-in clinic, I look down at my hands so emaciated, raw, red, and bleeding. I'm embarrassed to be here. I wonder, is this doctor going to tell me what all the other doctors told me, that I need help, but then not be able to direct me to anyone that could be helpful in figuring it all out? As I describe my daily routine with Dr. Morrison, she seems interested in helping me identify what I might be living with. She seems genuinely concerned about my behaviors and my compelling need to wash, using strong disinfectants for not only my skin, but my home. This, in my mind, helps to alleviate any germs that may be on my body, and therefore prevent an illness, not only to myself, but possibly to others. She would like to refer me to Dr. Vivian Rowan, who specializes in OCD. I remember leaving there with some glimmer of hope that somehow I'd be able to find out for certain what it is that's monopolizing my life every day. Maybe this ongoing fear of contracting AIDS and dying can somehow turn around and I can start living again, just maybe. It's September 25th, 1995, 9:30 in the morning. As I sit across from Dr. Rowan, she asked me so many questions that I couldn't even imagine talking about. How does she even know to ask those questions? I've always felt bad having these terrible thoughts. I never wanted to share them with the outside world. It's apparent as the session progresses that she is putting all the broken pieces of my life together. My heart is racing. I feel tremendous anxiety from within and also feel very, very vulnerable, having shared the thoughts that were mine to keep and no one else's. I knew I shouldn't have ever come here to this appointment. After all, who was I kidding? To think that someone could help me to change my thoughts. After all, they are mine, and how could they ever change? How could I ever imagine living without anxiety? Maybe these behaviors and thoughts are just who I am and who I've become. She looks up from her papers and breaks the silence. Sandra, you have obsessive-compulsive disorder. Part of me was relieved to put a name to it, and the other part of me was so scared. What does this mean? Did it mean that I didn't have a future? I wouldn't be able to function. Having recently graduated as a registered psychiatric nurse and married the man of my dreams, I was just starting a new life. And now it has come to an abrupt end. How is this all going to factor in? As time went on, my OCD only worsened. I remember my anxiety was overwhelming and I was unable to leave my apartment to do even the basic tasks of everyday life. My OCD required endless hours on a daily basis to perform the compulsions as a result of my obsessions. I recall attending a session with Dr. Rowan several months in, and she could see both the mental and physical toll OCD continued to have on my life. Her genuine concern for my well-being led her to the recommendation that we complete the paperwork to get me on long-term disability. And I remember very clearly her words, "You will never have to work another day in your life." Those words echoed in my ears. My first thought was, I am only 28 years old. I have a lot of living to do. I'm just getting started. I worked since I was 11. I wasn't ever afraid of working hard. Everything I ever had, I earned for myself. No one ever gave me a handout, and it was extremely difficult to find a hand up. Prior to going back to become a registered psychiatric nurse, I sold everything to make it work. I commuted back home on weekends to work just so I would have some source of income. I wasn't about to quit. Quit to what? I always knew that you take the easy way out, life will get harder. But if you take the hard way out, life will get easier. It was then that I realized I was determined to confront this thing called OCD. whatever that may look like and however long it may take. And so I began my journey to share it with the world so that there are less people who suffer in silence. I'm ready to give you the secret equation that I have already shared with hundreds of people, an easy, concrete approach that is designed to support you in your journey to live a more fulfilling life. Hello, my name is Sandra Wallace, and I'm the founder of the OCD Coach, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Unlearn Your Learned Reactions to OCD. There is so many interpretations of what OCD is, how people should respond, and what one can do to overcome or merely exist with their OCD. Education is power in helping to overcome what can be a very debilitating illness. If you're like me, I spent years responding to the voice of OCD by giving in. Here's the problem. I realized the more I gave into it, the worse it became. Hopefully, I'm able to share ways and means to help you prevent from going through the same ordeal. Let's get started. A little bit on my credentials. In 1994, I graduated as a registered psychiatric nurse and have spent the last 26 years practicing in acute psychiatry. My passion lies in working with individuals with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, for two main reasons. I was diagnosed in 1995 with having OCD, and since that time, have worked through a treatment modality called CBT, Cognitive Behavior Therapy, which has helped me to overcome my OCD. And as a result, I have reached out to other individuals living with OCD to help them overcome their OCD with the same treatment modality. Here are some interesting statistics surrounding OCD. It's estimated approximately 2.3% of the population between the ages of 15 and 50 suffer from OCD. It is equal among men and women, with the average age of onset being 19. This I found a little disturbing to know that only approximately 1/3 of affected adults who experience OCD will actually reach out for treatment. And although I find that disturbing, I can also identify with why people would not reach out. Because often our OCD thoughts are so incredibly daunting that we don't even want to share those thoughts with anyone else. So a lot of times we live in secrecy for years and years before reaching out to someone. For some of us living with OCD, we live our entire life in isolation because the OCD is so overwhelming and debilitating that we cannot function in society. That's another reason why I'm so passionate about educating others on OCD and helping them realize that it's something that we can overcome with time and practice. And that's the point that I want to make going forward in the webinar, is to show you ways that we can do just that. Think about other situations in life that you've been faced with where it's caused you some tremendous fear or anxiety. How about a time when you've lost your keys for your vehicle, or maybe the keys for work? Have you ever taken your child to a department store and they've snuck under the coat rack for that split second? You can't lay eyes on them? And that tremendous anxiety that comes along with that. Well, for us living with OCD, it's similar in that way because we respond by having the same physical and psychological responses as with other situations, such as that. But the difference with OCD is the relief from the fear is only temporary. So when we ritualize we decrease our anxiety, but it's not long before OCD lends itself to another go around. Well, hello, vicious cycle of OCD. Here we're going to break down exactly what happens step by step. The very first thing, an event takes place. This leads one to interpret it in an unrealistic manner. Do you remember what we referred to that as? That was our obsession. This often results in a feeling of harm, danger, impending doom, and often catastrophic thinking. As a result of all this, it triggers our anxiety, and we cannot tolerate neither the physical or psychological sensations related to the obsession. So, what do? We must perform a compulsion or ritual. This is where we breathe a sigh of relief, usually. Not always, it will reduce anxiety, but more times than not, it does. But what we fail to recognize is that the relief and the decrease in anxiety is only temporary. So, starting with contamination, some of the obsessions around this type of OCD would be preoccupation with germs, certain colors, their environment, surroundings, they may see as life-threatening. So as a result, one may avoid certain objects, places where others may have been in direct contact. So can you think of some place that one may avoid with contamination fears? Some of the answers have been washrooms, public malls, gatherings, greeting and shaking other people's hands. So as a result of this type of obsession, when it comes to their compulsions, you may see someone discreetly trying to pull down their arm of their sleeve over their hand, wash in a systematic way or over and over, say a certain phrase in mind to cancel out the obsession, as we referred to earlier, neutralizing the obsession, say certain numbers repeatedly to neutralize the obsession, or sometimes it's more obvious where you'll notice someone wearing gloves or dressing in layers to protect themselves from the contamination. One example I'd like to use is an elderly lady that I met in the Brandon Psychiatric Hospital. She always wore black gloves. She wore them on the unit, she wore them in the community, out on the grounds. She was always covering and protecting her hands, and she would often keep the gloves on even well into the night, just out of fear for having contacted directly any type of germs. Checking obsessions makes one check repeatedly to prevent bad things from happening to either themselves and or others. And that could involve significant others, acquaintances, total strangers. This often is very unrealistic and excessive responsibility for catastrophic events that might occur. And those responsibilities are a huge burden on the person living with OCD. They feel compelled to do the checks. For example, for myself, it would take a lot of time for me to get out of my home because I would have to continuously go back and forth in and out of the house to touch the stove elements, the dials, check the light fixtures, water faucets, just to prevent anything catastrophic from occurring. Obsessions related to scrupulosity often involve moral, ethical, or religious issues, and they have a strong association with religious or ethnic symbols. So part of the compulsion piece when it comes to scrupulosity is involving repetitive religious practices, seeking plenty of reassurance from others, such as a person's priest, minister, deacon, anyone they look up to in a spiritual and ethical way, regarding scrupulosity, and also an avoidance of religious symbols in some cases. So that might lead one not to attend ceremonies, religious activities, celebrations, etc., for fear of possibly looking at a statue and thinking of a bad word or thought. Symmetry involves fixating on items or objects requiring to be arranged in a certain order, pattern, or location. Earlier, I mentioned the example of sweaters. It could be anything from pens to furniture to arranging things that are in the household or in the workplace or even in people's vehicles. And part of the compulsion here is people will tend to arrange and rearrange or put things on angles, line them up by color, labels, or alphabet. The last one I'd like to speak in regards to is harm. The obsession here is often thoughts related to harming or killing their loved ones, themselves, or others, either accidentally or deliberately. They may continually think about it in an effort to reassure themselves that others are safe or to somehow undo the terrible thought. Avoiding certain places, situations, or invites just to play it safe and make sure that they are not going to be in a situation to make others vulnerable to this fear. So the compulsion is they often desperately try to stop thinking about these unpleasant thoughts. So you can appreciate that when we talk about the DSM and the obsession piece being defined as unwanted and intrusive, this is where the harm obsession really comes into play. And they want to make every possible reassurance that they will not act on the thought. So much so that they start to put things away in their home, such as any sharp items, knives, no steak knives, nothing sharp, and things that may be used to harm others is completely eliminated from their household, from their site, and also from anywhere else that they may be exposed to these items. So they may not go to certain restaurants where they know they use steak knives, such as the Keg restaurant, or they may never frequent a cooking store because they know for a fact there'll be plenty of sharp objects in that store. Individuals living with OCD often feel very guilty and struggle with their thoughts. This struggle makes them more persistent and chronic. To overcome OCD, one has to let go of this struggle, but that's easier said than done. I want to make one thing very clear. Avoiding the feared situation only makes the fear stronger. What people don't realize is that by staying in the feared situation, it actually lessens the fear over time. This was extremely difficult for me to comprehend, and it took a lot of practice because I kept saying to myself, why would I ever want to expose myself to the very thing that triggers my anxiety and gets me going on a vicious roller coaster with the cycle of OCD. I just could not comprehend it. And it wasn't till I started CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and I had my coach with me by my side to help me understand this a little bit more easier. And by providing me the support I needed to put myself in those feared situations, it was only then I started to understand the true definition of what this meant. This slide here I have provided for you living with OCD to realize that you're not alone. Typically, people with OCD think catastrophically and have this exaggerated sense of responsibility. Therefore, recovery is a step-by-step process. We need to recognize the familiar cycle or pattern of obsessions and compulsions. For example, here we have a chain of thoughts, and as we read through them, I'm certain that some of you will be able to identify with these thoughts. I've had each and every one of them, and I continue to have them periodically. Such as, I will be unable to stop thinking about it. Having this thought actually means I will go crazy, become violent, or lose control. I may even snap. Having a really violent thought means I really want to do it. Thinking about it means I am a terrible person, thus vilifying themselves and feeling embarrassed. One must learn to address the anxiety rather than the obsession. Ain't that the truth? Again, one must learn to address the anxiety rather than the obsession. Our obsessions are not who we are. If we didn't care as individuals, these types of thoughts would not be intrusive and offer. Imagine how you would feel if you could wake up to the freedom of life choices rather than the slavery of irrational thought processes. If the limits placed on you by your OCD were no more, what might having the ability to make choices freely look like for you? How about being able to rid yourself of fears that once paralyzed you and therefore no longer part of your being? Shatter the shackles that have bound you like a prisoner in your own body for so long. Live each day fearlessly. Imagine to learn to recognize OCD for what it truly is. Today can be the day that marks the beginning of the rest of your life, but you must realize that in order for something to change in your life, something has to change in your life. This is for you if you want to take yourself from fear to freedom. By signing up for the 6-week course, you'll be able to learn to challenge your OCD and refrain from doing compulsions. This course will help break down the thoughts, feelings, and reactions to OCD, as well as learn how to identify your triggers. You will then be able to apply a new way of thinking and responding in real-life scenarios as you go along. New coping techniques will be learned to help alleviate the anxiety associated with OCD. There will be opportunities to learn new ways of looking at your OCD, and with time and implementation, you'll be able to reprogram your mindset. The ultimate goal is to guide you in living a happy life with OCD. Please click the link below to learn more and receive your free gift for attending the webinar. We'll see you there.